This one is food for thought, intense and controversial. It is to question a few things, actually many things. It is a stream of thoughts that is hard to come back from. So here is a big meal for my brain and yours. As putting this together is going to be hard and long, I hope it makes sense to you. I hope it is worth your time. I hope it lights a few things or ideas that you might be able to make a positive change around you. In the 60s of the 20th century, colonization ended around the world. Britain, the empire that the sun never sets on, left its colonies from the Far East to Africa. France, Portugal, and all other European countries left their colonies around the world. Did you know that Hong Kong was handed over to the Chinese by Britain in 1997? I didn't know that till I did my research for this video. Independence marked an end of one era, yet the beginning of another. One that involves less military interference, yet more political and economic control. Poverty being the key factor of control, corruption, and knowing enough dirt about politicians and decision-makers gave power to those who were able to acquire information and control on technology. Technology. Well, you can blame those who spent billions researching and inventing for using that technology for their best interests. You simply cannot. Well, it can be a tricky question. Exactly like throwing crops in the sea to maintain the price of certain goods. Predominantly, most essential ones, like wheat or rice, just to keep the price in control. While some nations are struggling to have sufficient food for their people, and famine hits some countries around the globe, is it right? Maybe. Do they have the right to do so? Yes, they own these crops, don't they? Is it ethical? Hell no. And if you say it is, then you need to check your values, my friend. This is exactly what we will be talking about. And I honestly don't know how long this will be, but I got a lot of thoughts, a lot of unanswered questions. The manifestation of poverty. Manifestation means an event, action, or object that clearly shows or embodies something, abstract or theoretical. So it can be a result, or a coincidence. It can be man-made, or just normal sequence of events. I will be leaving that for you to decide. Just recently, we heard about the conflict in Niger, with a new government coming in place, replacing the old one, just to know that the French imports of uranium was being acquired from Niger at 0.8 euros, while the market price can exceed 100 euros per kilogram. This was not only shocking to me, but made me ask a question. Why? Why did the government of Niger accept such price? And how did the French manage to convince them to sell at that price? The answer will always be corruption, treason, and many other things that are never good to have in a government. Can the French do that legally? Yes, they can. They did for only God knows how many years. Binding agreements, contracts, and corporate decisions in the market. What can we do about it? The news only made it to me at the time of the revolution or coup, whatever you want to call it. But for how many years did the people of Niger know about this agreement? Imagine the number of resources being traded in such terms, with corruption and treason with every signature. Imagine decision makers knowing they will not get caught or be under trial for any of the crimes they commit. Imagine those contracts or agreements in place, resources being literally exploited out of the countries, while the people of these countries live in adverse conditions, in severe poverty, and hard-working condition, with probably no social insurance. or medical insurance to come into play when needed. It is happening in many places in the world. Sometimes when you do not abide as a government or people, you are faced with many trials and tribulations, sanctions, deprivation of technology, medicine, or even food when needed. I remember a few times where I heard about countries struggling to import wheat due to some political pressures. Not because they didn't have the money, just no one would give them wheat till they fall in line. Some countries are faced with actions against their products. Many times after exporting certain crop or a product to a country, you hear about the product not meeting the quality requirements of that country. This too can be a political move. So, as an exporter, you have the cost of a product, its shipping cost. Then when it reaches the destination, you find out that it will not be sold. You will end up either throwing these crops or products in the sea, or shipping it back home, hoping to cut down on your losses. These things happen so many times over the past 20 years. Sanctions. There are plenty of that, as we saw being used in the Ukrainian-Russian war, or on Iran. Since 2005, the United States has imposed sanctions on Venezuelan individuals and entities that have engaged in criminal, anti-democratic, or corrupt actions. The Trump administration expanded the scope of U.S. sanctions, moving beyond individually targeted sanctions to include broader financial sanctions, sectoral sanctions, and sanctions on the government of Nicolas Maduro. Despite those sanctions, which were associated with an economic collapse that has led 7.7 million Venezuelans to flee the country. In response to increasing repression in Venezuela, Congress enacted the Venezuela Defense of Human Rights and Civil Society Act of 2014. Among its provisions, the law required the president to impose sanctions against those who the president identified as responsible for significant acts of violence, serious human rights abuses, or anti-democratic actions. Congress extended this act through 2023. Venezuela, the oil-rich country, the largest oil reserves in the world, is struggling economically due to those imposed sanctions. So the country that caused the highest number of deaths and conflicts around the world in the current century, either directly or indirectly, the one with a lot of human rights scandals in Abu Ghraib prison, or Guantanamo Bay, is punishing Venezuela into bankruptcy due to their human rights violations and lack of democracy. The natural resources of Venezuela include petroleum, natural gas, iron ore, gold, bauxite, other minerals, hydropower, and diamonds. Yet, they are still very poor as a nation. That being manifested and imposed on all countries with no exception by superpowers around the world. The technology to manufacture, extract, and the military power to support in controlling any nation if they think they can go rogue. That is just the surface of it. There are a lot more to say on this. Many examples from ousting Saddam in Iraq, killing Gaddafi in Libya, removing Chavez from office while he was democratically elected. U.S. arranged a coup against him, till the people of Venezuela took it to their hands to put him back in office. And many other examples of this scandalous interventions, economically, military, and politically. Now, take this lower many layers down, and in many places around the world, you will find each person looking out for their interests, doing everything passable, ethical and non-ethical to kill competition. Importers influence decision-makers to stop local manufacturing, or spreading rumors about a new competitor. Sometimes even vandalize the production plant, or the farms of those who are a threat to their business. As a government, there are always laws to fight monopoly, market manipulation, and even engineering the prices in the favor of the few. But with corruption at high levels in many countries around the world, those laws are easily frozen under the label of free markets. Although the manifestation of poverty is a complex and multifaceted phenomenon that goes beyond a simple lack of financial resources, poverty can manifest in various dimensions, impacting individuals, families, and communities in different ways. The most apparent sign of poverty is the lack of income and material resources needed to meet basic human needs. This includes insufficient access to food, shelter, clean water, education, and health care. So, some countries, for example, price items with the international price, like oil or certain good, or even food, while the population has lower average wage or salary. Some economies are dependent on having lower wage than their region, while they expect their people to pay the global market price for their food and goods. This plays a huge part in the purchase power of the individuals. And once the cycle breaks, it will end with the collapse of the economy, as people will do what they need to survive, cut back on expenses, work 2 or even 3 jobs to sustain an adequate life. But eventually this will collapse as the people will stop buying. Companies go bankrupt, leading to mass job losses, further drop in the incomes, and lack of products. Prices increase, crime increase, and that eventually lead to the collapse of societies. Inflation in Venezuela, the rich in resources country in South America, is 400%, 172% in Zimbabwe. Argentina 113%. That is during 2023. So the purchase power dropped by these percentages, among many other countries with significantly high inflation rates. It is common knowledge that poverty often restricts access to quality education. Children from impoverished backgrounds may face barriers impacting their education, such as inadequate school infrastructure, a lack of educational materials, and the necessity to work or care for family members, hindering their educational attainment. Poverty is also closely linked to health disparities. So besides education, it also impacts health and access to the needed medical attention. Imagine that impact on the future of those nations. Limited access to health care, nutritious food, and sanitary living conditions can result in higher rates of illness, malnutrition, and a lower life expectancy among individuals living in poverty. Lack of job opportunities or underemployment can contribute to poverty. People in poverty may face challenges in securing stable employment with fair wages, perpetuating the cycle of economic hardship. Poverty also often leads to inadequate and unstable housing conditions. Individuals and families may live in overcrowded, unsafe, or substandard housing, increasing their vulnerability to health and safety risks. Poverty leads to social exclusion and marginalization. Those living in poverty may face discrimination, stigma, and limited access to social networks and community resources, further isolating them from mainstream society. Poverty is interconnected with other social issues, such as gender inequality, racial discrimination, and systemic injustices. Certain demographic groups may be disproportionately affected by poverty due to systemic factors that limit their opportunities. Living in poverty has a profound psychological and emotional effects. Constant financial stress, uncertainty about the future, and the inability to meet basic needs can lead to feelings of hopelessness, anxiety, and low self-esteem. Environmental conditions can contribute to poverty, particularly in regions prone to natural disasters, climate change, or environmental degradation. Vulnerable communities may face increased challenges in adapting to and recovering from such events. Lack of access to formal banking and financial services can hinder economic mobility. People in poverty may rely on informal financial mechanisms, making it difficult to save, invest, or access credit. Understanding the multidimensional nature of poverty is crucial for developing effective strategies to alleviate its impacts. Addressing poverty requires a comprehensive approach that encompasses economic, social, and policy interventions to create sustainable change and promote inclusive development. Governments can play a role in either exacerbating or alleviating poverty through their policies, actions, and governance. While not all instances of poverty can be directly attributed to government actions, certain policies or practices may contribute to or perpetuate conditions of poverty. The ways in which governments might inadvertently contribute to poverty: corruption, ineffective economic policies, lack of access to education, discriminatory practices, unfair land and resource distribution. Inadequate investment in education can perpetuate cycles of poverty. Political instability and conflict, lack of social services, failure to address environmental issues, unemployment and underemployment, ineffective social safety nets. Widespread corruption within a government can divert resources away from essential services and development projects, contributing to economic stagnation and poverty. When public funds are misappropriated or embezzled, they are not available for initiatives that could benefit the entire population. Poorly designed economic policies, such as regressive taxation, trade imbalances, or inadequate social safety nets, can contribute to income inequality and hinder economic development. These policies may disproportionately affect the poor and exacerbate poverty levels. If governments fail to provide accessible and quality education, individuals may lack the skills and knowledge needed to escape poverty, leading to generational poverty. Discriminatory policies based on factors such as gender, ethnicity, or socioeconomic status can disproportionately affect certain groups, leading to their exclusion from opportunities and resources. This exclusion can contribute to the perpetuation of poverty among marginalized populations. Land and resource distribution policies that favor a small elite at the expense of the broader population can lead to landlessness and limited access to natural resources for the poor. This hinders their ability to generate income and sustain themselves. Governments that fail to address political instability or engage in conflicts can disrupt economic activities, displace populations, and impede development efforts. Such conditions can lead to increased poverty rates. Insufficient investment in social services such as health care, sanitation, and public infrastructure can hinder human development and contribute to the persistence of poverty. Access to essential services is crucial for improving the well-being of the population. Inadequate environmental policies and failure to address environmental degradation can disproportionately affect vulnerable communities, leading to loss of livelihoods and increased poverty, especially in regions dependent on agriculture or natural resources. Governments that fail to create an enabling environment for job creation and economic growth may contribute to high levels of unemployment and underemployment. A lack of viable employment opportunities can keep people in poverty. Governments that do not establish or maintain effective social safety nets may leave their populations vulnerable to economic shocks. Robust social safety nets can help protect individuals and families from falling deeper into poverty during challenging times. It's essential to recognize that the relationship between government actions and poverty is complex, and various factors contribute to poverty in different contexts. Governments can also play a positive role in poverty reduction through the implementation of inclusive policies, social programs, and sustainable development strategies. Effective governance, transparency, and accountability are crucial for addressing the root causes of poverty and promoting equitable development. There is a quote that says, "The strong do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must." That is what happens in our world. Humanity, democracy, or any values are subject to profitability, subject to the will of those who will make money out of every crisis or adversity that may happen in any place in the world. Sometimes those adversities are created just to make those pockets deeper.